whose staff may be watching, encourage their bosses to come on down to the hearing. And do we want to make some phone calls? Yeah? Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate that. We've got some really good folks talking today, and it'd be great for the members to get a chance to hear, especially since so many of them were not able to make our hearing in Los Angeles. All right, so good morning. Welcome to our joint oversight hearing on statewide voter turnout. I'm Senator Ben Allen. I'm the chair of the Senate Committee on Elections and Constitutional Amendments. Joining me here is my good friend and Los Angeles colleague, Assemblymember Sebastian Ridley Thomas, who's chair of the Assembly Committee on Elections and Redistricting. And I want to make everyone aware that the hearing is being streamed live on the internet, which can be accessed through both my Senate homepage, the committee homepage. Also, if there's any members of the public who wish to testify following our scheduled witnesses, please see one of our Senate sergeants who have a sign-in sheet. If there are multiple people in attendance representing the same organization, please designate one person to testify on your behalf. So the purpose of this joint oversight hearing is to investigate and discuss the causes and ramifications of the historically low voter turnout we saw in California during the 2014 primary and general elections, and then in some of the more recent local elections in 2015. We'll also be exploring possible remedies. We had an excellent hearing in Los Angeles in February that brought up some really fantastic ideas, and I would just encourage anyone who has not had the opportunity to watch that meeting, who cares about these issues, to check out that hearing. The issue in Los Angeles, of course, was special. According to the Secretary of State, only 25% of all registered California voters cast a ballot in the June primary, and only 42% in the November general election. In Los Angeles County, it was 31%. So a full 11 points. The largest county in the state was a full 11 points below this already pretty paltry statewide average. So we were looking at some of the issues specific to LA County. Today we're going to be looking statewide. Now, to put this problem into context, since 1960, turnout of registered voters in California off-year general elections has steadily decreased from a high of 79.2, nearly 80% in 1966, to a previous low of 50.57 in 2002. Turnout for off-year primary elections since 1960 has also steadily decreased from a high of nearly 70% in 1978, when Proposition 13 was on the ballot, to a previous low of 33.3% in 2010. Now, granted, voter turnout was poor across the entire country in 2014, but California ranked an inexcusable 43rd in turnout among the 50 states and the District of Columbia. Now, of course, there's a lot of theories that abound as to why the statewide turnout was so low last year. Perhaps it was the lack of a high-profile competitive contest at the state level that would have motivated voters to participate in greater numbers. And after all, statewide voter turnout for presidential general elections usually exceeds about 70% in California. Apparently, when most of our registered voters will make the effort when it comes to choosing our president. Witnesses at the LA hearing talked about this as like people who wait until the Super Bowl to watch their first football game of the season. I'm a playoff sports fan, and I focus in on the playoffs, but maybe that's part of what's going on here. But other factors such as poverty, language diversity may have also contributed to our low voter turnout. We also talked about some things that can be done at the county levels to try to increase, to deal with the question of voter outreach. National data suggests that 3 factors played a large role in driving turnout in the higher ranking states last year. Competitive statewide races for governor, U.S. Senate, implementation of election day voter registration, and all mail balloting in at least a few states. Election day registration will commence here in 2017. And we obviously cannot legislate competitive races, though there's some things I suppose that could be done in that. Additional use of all-mail balloting is something that is being discussed as an option. Clearly, California voters are already choosing that option voluntarily in greater numbers. Last year, 60% of all votes in the general election and nearly 70% of all the votes in the primary election were cast using mail ballots. Of course, in LA County, that number was much lower because LA County had rolled out the vote-by-mail program much slower than other counties had. And that might have also helped to contribute to their lower voter turnout. The percentage of mail ballots cast in our ubiquitous special elections is even greater. Of course, Oregon has an all-mail ballot system, and one of the things we'll be talking about is that they just have decided to turn to an automatic registration system, which is something we're going to be thinking about and talking about as well. We've also been looking a lot at the hybrid system that they have in Colorado, where every voter is mailed a ballot, and then there are voting centers that are open for 2 weeks before each election. And I actually have a bill that helps to facilitate that sort of program. We've already approved a pilot project for San Diego County where they may conduct special elections in a similar manner, but that opportunity may or may not present itself anytime soon. It just depends on when a special opens up there. I'll certainly be asking many of our witnesses today about how they would feel about expanding that pilot project. Ultimately, there's simply no excuse for making the act of voting difficult. Voting should be convenient. Voters should have options regarding when, how, and where they cast their ballots. It's also time to seriously review where elections and voter outreach falls in the hierarchy of state and local funding priorities. I'm aware, for example, that the state has failed to fund election-related mandates in the last several years for such important milestones as permanent and no-excuse voting by mail. Policies that voters now take for granted, should not be denied to them. But the state and federal governments have made elections a budget priority in the past, and they can do so, and I think they should do so again. I think the bottom line we heard from the last hearing, we may very well hear today, is that we can't expect substantial results unless we're willing to make a substantial investment. So we're going to be hearing from a variety of distinguished witnesses representing government, community organizations, academia, and others. I'm anxious to hear their views on the causes and ramifications of our poor voter turnout, as well as their suggestions for appropriate remedies. So I'll now turn the microphone over to my co-chair, Assemblymember Ridley Thomas, and any other members who may wish to make opening remarks.
Thank you, Senator Allen. Very pleased to join you this afternoon to talk about one of the most pressing civic engagement issues of our time, which is voter participation, voter access, and making sure that we engage as many of our neighbors and friends in California to participate in the civic process and vote. We know that this being the 50th anniversary of the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the march across the Selma Bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, is a unique point for us to focus and think about how we can re-engage various populations to get back to the ballot box. We have a number of proposals that will be heard in both of our committees that will begin advancing that conversation. And we'd love to hear from stakeholders and advocates that are in this room and outside of this physical space, because we know it's going to take a great deal, and it's all of our responsibility to make sure that we have ease of access, that we have sufficient protections for the voting process and the integrity of the ballot, and that we really drill down on making it a more common sense 21st century mode, which I think we failed at, frankly, as a legislature, as oversight and regulatory entities, as advocates for many years. So this is a unique opportunity. Senator Allen is focused like a laser, and I'm glad to be his partner in access toward voting, civic engagement, and the ballot. Thank you, Senator.
Well, thank you very much, Co-Chair. So now we'd like to hear our very first panel. We'll call them up to the witness table. And we've got three fantastic panelists that will be talking to us about state and local elections administration. James Schwab, who's the Chief of Legislative Affairs for our Secretary of State. Candace Grubbs, the County Clerk and Recorder Registrar of Voters in Butte County. And then Neil Kelly from the Orange County Registrar of Voters. Also, Neil is President of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials. Mr. Schwab will start. His boss gave a very lengthy and informative presentation to the committee during the Los Angeles hearing, and we're looking to hear an update from you today. So, Mr. Schwab.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in today's hearing and for allowing me to speak on behalf of Secretary of State Alex Padilla. I want to thank the co-chairs of this committee, Chairman Allen and Chairman Ridley Thomas, for tackling one of the most important issues facing our country and our state, the lack of voter participation. Even with the low national turnout, as the Chairman Allen mentioned, California ranked 43rd in participation. Think about that. California was at the bottom of participation in a year when participation bottomed out. Clearly, we can and must do more. The Secretary believes we must recognize that each of us have a civic duty to improve participation in our democracy. For Secretary Padilla, he is focused on 4 ways to improve voter turnout: modernize our voter registration process, explore new voting options, establish new partnerships to promote election information, and strengthening civic education. Voter registration is one of the biggest barriers to participation in our democracy. 20 years ago, the National Voter Registration Act, or Motor Voter, was enacted by Congress. The law begins with the congressional findings that the right of citizens to vote is a fundamental right. It is the duty of every federal, state, and local government to promote the exercise of that right to vote. The first purpose of the act is to establish procedures that will increase the number of eligible citizens who register to vote in elections for federal office. These findings and purposes remain true today. This is why yesterday, Secretary Padilla announced his support of Oregon's law to modernize motor voter. A new enhanced motor voter law would strengthen our democracy. It would be a game changer. There are nearly 7 million eligible but unregistered voters in California, ranking our state 38th in voter registration. A new modern motor voter would utilize 21st century electronic data technologies to make voter registration easier, more convenient, and more efficient. This change may not happen overnight, but if we are serious about increasing voter turnout, we should follow Oregon's lead and commit ourselves to registering as many California citizens as possible. The new Oregon law will register citizens to vote or update their registration when they get or renew a driver's license. Specifically, the Oregon law directs the Oregon Department of Transportation to provide the Secretary of State with electronic records containing legal name, age, residence, and electronic signature of each person who may qualify as a voter. The law directs the Secretary of State to register as a voter each non-registered person who is qualified to vote, and to notify that person on how to decline registration and how to select political party affiliation. The law also protects voter registration information for persons registered to vote who are under 18 or are on confidential information lists. The Secretary is prepared to work with the legislature to craft California's version of the law. The Secretary is also focused on exploring modern options for voting. And there are states we can learn from here as well. This May, Secretary Padilla will be visiting Denver, Colorado during their municipal elections to see what we can learn from their modernized election system. Colorado ranked 3rd in voter turnout in 2014, so there are likely lessons to be learned. Colorado has full same-day registration, vote centers, e-poll books, ballot on demand, and they mail every registered voter a ballot. Colorado's vote centers allow any voter in a county to cast a ballot at any center. Voters are no longer tied to specific polling places. Colorado's same-day registration allows any eligible voter to show up at a vote center, register to vote or change their address, and cast a full ballot. Their e-poll book system allows them in real time to verify registration and if they have cast a ballot. Colorado also mails every registered voter a ballot. If they lose their ballot or decide to vote in person, they may go to any vote center and cast a ballot. We will learn more details of how Colorado deploys this model and will bring back ideas and options for California. The Secretary of State is also focused on establishing new partnerships. In the spirit of reminding everyone of their civic responsibility, we will be reaching out to the media, transit authorities, Silicon Valley, government agencies, community organizations, private foundations, and others. We will ask newspapers to fulfill their responsibility and place on the front page of every paper elections information and deadlines. We will ask the media to include important voting information in any story they write about an election, the date of the election, registration deadlines, and website links. We want to make voting information ever present. We will also be reaching out to social media companies like Facebook, Google, and Twitters and others to do their part to motivate and inform voters. In fact, Google has taken the lead with their voting information project, which is a partnership with the Pew Charitable Trusts. VIP helps voters online by finding answers to some of the most common election questions. Where's my polling place? What's on my ballot? How do I vote? We also want to work with groups like the League of Women Voters, Rock the Vote, and MapLight, who are working on new ways to consolidate and distribute candidate and proposition information from president all the way down to dog catcher. We will work with our Department of Transportation to use our digital freeway signs to post election information and deadlines. The signs are used to make us aware of the drought in our state, but what about the drought at our polls? Assemblymember Alejo has introduced legislation on this issue, and the Secretary strongly supports that bill. We will work with public transportation agencies to post election information on buses, rail, transit stops, and more. We should use the idle time on mass transit to reach voters with signage and video. Lastly, the Secretary is focused on civic education. One of the toughest parts of increasing turnout is addressing the attitude that a vote doesn't matter. I can sit here and go through a list of close elections that happened just last year, but apathy towards civic engagement goes deeper than that. The Secretary wants to focus attention on civic engagement in K through 12 and college when youth are developing their habits and behavior. One startling statistic is that in 2014, an 18 or 19-year-old was more likely to be arrested than to cast a ballot in a statewide election. 8.2% of eligible California youth cast a ballot in 2014 November election. In California, a survey of nearly 2,400 high school seniors revealed that just 60% could correctly answer questions designed to test their knowledge of current political issues and the structures and functions of government. On that same survey, less than half of high school seniors viewed being actively involved in state and local issues as their responsibility. We need to engage young people earlier and more often and develop lifelong habits of voting and interest in civics. To start, the Secretary wants to strengthen voter registration at our schools and colleges. High schools and colleges are currently required to offer voter registration under California's Student Voter Registration Act, that law was authored by another Assemblymember Lee Thomas. Over the past 3 years, though, there's been a significant decline in student voter registration forms from our schools and colleges. In 2012, when online registration first went live, we hit a peak of 23,000 registrations. But last year, it declined to 9,700. In 2012, the Secretary of State received roughly 11,000 paper registration forms from schools and colleges, but last year, only 2,500. To improve these numbers, we're looking at states like Ohio, Tennessee, and Maine, where they designated high schools as voter registration agencies under the National Voter Registration Act. In addition, Maryland, New Mexico, New York, Oregon, Virginia, and West Virginia have used that same authority to designate their public universities as voter registration agencies. That model might work for California. The Secretary also recently attended a voter registration day here in Sacramento at the Met High School. The event was part of a months-long program to educate students about the voting process. The best part? It was initiated and ran by the students themselves. The Sacramento County Registrar of Voters, Jill Levine, worked with the students to organize the event. She said it was one of their most successful voter registration events. We want to use models like these and promote them statewide. We will also work with the Task Force on K-12 Civic Learning, led by our Chief Justice and Superintendent of Public Instruction, to promote youth participation. The Secretary is also committed to successfully implementing pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds next year. In closing, we just came off one of the worst turnouts in 70 years. Yet this year we're celebrating the March on Selma and the signing of the Voting Rights Act. Let's not just celebrate, but let's honor this year's anniversaries by carrying on the work of past generations. We know the ideas, we know the technologies that have the strong potential to increase voter participation. Let's poke, let's prod, let's kick the tires, and see if they're good for California. We have a strong coalition of election officials, civil rights groups, and community groups that are aligning their agendas and working together as the group, the future of California elections. We have leaders in the legislature that are dedicating their time and energy to solving the voter turnout dilemma. We have a Secretary of State who's committed to turning that trend of apathy around and making California the leader in promoting democracy and civic engagement. The timing is right. Let's work together and increase participation in our elections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schwab. I see Vice Chair Anderson, Speaker Pro Tem Mullen, and Senator Hertzberger here. Did any of you want to make opening comments? Or? No.
I
think I'm going to save mine to the end, if that's all right.
Okay, all right. Okay,
I just want to say, excellent presentation, man. Good job.
all right.
Thank you.
And then as a piece of housekeeping, I know the Senate has a floor session at 4 p.m. I think the plan for now was for us to do as much as we can up to then, briefly adjourn and then reconvene after the floor session, but we can discuss that further as we like. Okay, it should be a quick floor session. It just is the passage of these drought measures. All right. Yeah, maybe a little too quick. Okay, so let's go on to, let's actually next go to Mr. Kelly, who's our Orange County Registrar of Voters. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, Chairman Ridley Thomas, Chairman Allen. It's good to see you again after that wonderful premiere here of Selma in Sacramento just a few weeks ago. And honorable members of the committee, it's great to be here. My name is Neil Kelly. I'm the Registrar of Voters for Orange County. But primarily, I'm here today in my role as president of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials. The 2014 election cycle featured a lower turnout rate than any of us had hoped for across the state, and lower than any of us had seen for quite some time. But when looking at it from a broader perspective, 2014 looks like a less disturbing trend and hopefully more like an unfortunate anomaly. Voter participation has risen and fallen over the years, with general elections drawing more votes than primary or special elections. But when looking at statewide elections over the last decade or so, no massive downward trend appears, although, Chairman Allen, I agree with you that it is a downward trend, obviously. While numbers could be higher and trying to increase voter participation is a worthy goal, turnout in 2014 seems to be the exception rather than the rule, I'm hoping. Not including special off-year elections, only one statewide election compares to the low turnout numbers from June of last year. As you know, in 2008, California held their presidential primary election in February, separate from the rest of the regular primary ballot, which was put before voters in June. The February 2008 presidential primary saw a turnout of 39.52% of eligible voters, which is a strong showing for a primary, but the June 2008 statewide primary, without the presidential contest on the ballot, saw a turnout of only 19.75% of eligible voters, which was comparable to June of last year in 2014. This demonstrates something I've noticed in my experience as an election official, which I've been doing for the last 11 years, and that is the biggest driver of voter turnout is interest in what's on the ballot, primarily. Voters are more likely to vote in elections with competitive, high-profile contests. One needs to look no further than the difference in turnout between presidential and non-presidential elections to verify this. If voters believe that their vote can make a difference in a competitive race, or that something on the ballot will make a meaningful difference in their lives day to day, they'll show up at the polls. It's pretty simple. They just need to think it's worth their time. That being said, I do not believe that requiring interesting and competitive races for every election is within the purview of this committee, and I understand that. And either way, this is not the only factor that determines voter turnout. Far from it. Just as an example in Orange County, we've seen other time constraints, we've seen apathy, general feelings toward the government, voter fatigue, the weather can all be factors in voter turnout. Low voter turnout is a complex, multifaceted issue with no silver bullet solution. No single change in the law or new program will be able to solve low voter turnout for good. But efforts can be made that will help increase voter participation. I really believe that. Any effort to increase voter participation must start first and foremost with assuring that the electoral process is open and accessible. The ability of all eligible citizens to access the voter registration process, the ballot, and information on elections is vital to a healthy democracy and an engaged electorate. As election officials, our main concern and responsibility is to make sure that the proper infrastructure is in place so that any voter who wishes to can fill out a ballot, turn it in, and have their vote counted. I believe that before we try to make sure more eligible voters do participate, we have to make sure all eligible voters can participate. One way to do that is to expand opportunities, such as exploring vote centers, as James talked about, allowing more access to vote by mail, and extended voting times. During the Joint Committee hearing held a month ago in Los Angeles, a lot of impressive ideas, such as automatic registration, were being discussed. Whether or not you actually decide to pursue these ideas, please keep in mind that elections in California are already beginning to go through a process of great change, especially in the next 2 years. We are preparing for the statewide implementation of VoteCal, which will finally put California in full compliance with HAVA and bring with it same-day registration and pre-registration of 16 and 17-year-olds. And while we get ready for that massive change to our infrastructures, we also have to plan for another one, and that is that voting systems we purchased 10+ years ago are definitely aging. They will soon need to be replaced, no small feat given the costs and certification issues associated with such a transition. We would respectfully advise against making too many major transitions or rolling out too many major projects at one time. Such moves require careful planning, we believe, and testing before they are fully implemented. We certainly, I think all of us, want successful rollout of VoteCal. It is important to note that there are existing methods that can be supplemented and expanded. County elections officials already conduct outreach efforts within our communities, particularly our underrepresented communities, encouraging voter registration and participation. We have the infrastructure, the connections, the relationships already in place at the county level. What we don't have, and Chairman Allen, you referred to this, and I appreciate it, are the resources. All jurisdictions are struggling to pay the costs of elections, even when there is only one candidate on the ballot. It is very true that we have limited resources and permanent year-round staff to work with. For example, payments from the state mandates to election officials by the Elections Code were suspended in 2011. This forces us to take away resources from other areas like voter outreach. I agree that we must all work together to increase participation, but I think it's important to keep the discussion of limited resources in the conversation. In summary, I believe that increasing the options for voters to cast a ballot, such as at vote centers with extended hours, expansion of secure vote-by-mail options, weekend voting as a possibility, could very possibly create exciting momentum by engaging the electorate with a natural byproduct of increased voter turnout. The facts are in front of us, and I really believe, from a passionate standpoint, believe this. Just a few days ago, I certified the 37th special Senate district election. We operated 189 polling places in Orange County, all of which were essentially vacant. 87% of voters cast their ballot by mail in that election. We can't ignore those facts. Our partnership will be crucial not just to increasing turnout, but to any efforts to change and improve elections in California. It's critically important for CACEO to work closely with the legislature and the Secretary of State as we look forward to next year and beyond. 2016 promises to be an eventful election cycle, and I think you will find that it will come with a significant increase in voter turnout over 2014. Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
All right, I think we'll finish up with the whole panel and then allow folks to ask everyone questions. Oh, Senator Morlock just referred to your election.
I just wanted to say, good job.
If you'd like to, you want to join us on the dais? You have the most recent experience with an election.
F5?
You did a great job.
Okay.
You counted them right.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Well, good. You're welcome to join us if you like, Senator. So let's next hear from Ms. Grubbs, who's the county clerk and recorder registrar of voters for Butte County.
Thank you, Chairman Allen. So that I don't go over what my two esteemed fellows here have already said, I'm going to give you a perspective from a mid-sized county. Butte County encompasses 1,636 square miles of land with a population of over 220,000 residents. The majority of the residents live in those 5 incorporated towns. Butte County has 2 colleges, California State University Chico and Butte Community College. Between those 2, they have over 30,000 students. In the November 14 general election, with 117,503 registered voters, the voter participation was only 54%. Of those voting, 72% chose to vote by mail. In the June primary, with the students gone, 79% of the voters voted by mail. Please make note of those numbers. As the chief election official of the county, I have watched the change in attitude by voters over the years. and they have changed from voting at the polls to voting by mail. The Butte County Board of Supervisors, county administration, and myself believe it is time to restructure the voting experience for the benefit of all of our citizens. How can this be done? One, as said before, is to provide all citizens with a vote-by-mail ballot. Two, provide one or more vote centers in each of the 5 incorporated towns. What is a vote center? A vote center is a large, well-known facility for those students that wish to vote in person. Vote centers would be selected with several considerations. First, location would be along major thoroughfares, bus routes, and areas highly visible in the county. Second, facilities would meet all accessibility requirements mandated through the Help America Vote Act and the Americans with Disability Act. Third, they must meet the requirements to provide a live, secure connectivity to the county's electronic poll books to ensure a voter does not vote more than once. Additionally, voting equipment, new voting equipment would handle all ballot types. In other words, there would be no wrong place to vote. If you lived in Chico and worked in Oroville, you could stop in and vote in Oroville.